The late afternoon sun stretched long and golden across the dusty road, casting shadows that danced with every slow step of the horse. The cowboy rode quietly, his posture relaxed but his eyes observant. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular, just passing through another small town that looked much like the last. A few wooden buildings, a schoolhouse, and a scattering of homes surrounded by open land. It was the kind of place people either grew roots in or left behind. As he neared the edge of town, a faint sound drifted toward him, children's voices. At first, it was nothing unusual. Laughter, chatter, the carefree noise of youth. But then something in the tone shifted. The laughter sharpened. It wasn't joyful anymore. It carried a sting. He slowed his horse. Near the schoolyard fence stood a small group of children, no older than 8 or 9. They circled around a little girl who stood apart, her back straight but her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her dress was simple, slightly worn, and her shoes had seen better days. But it wasn't her appearance that held the cowboys' attention, it was her silence. "You don't even have a father," one boy called out, his voice loud with mockery. "Yeah, nobody wants you." Another chimed in, followed by a ripple of laughter. The cowboy's jaw tightened slightly. He had heard cruel words before. Life had a way of delivering them freely, but something about this moment felt heavier. Maybe it was the way the girl didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stood there, absorbing every word as if she had heard them too many times before. The wind stirred gently, lifting a strand of her hair across her face. She brushed it aside with a small, almost automatic motion. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground, but there was something in them, something steady, something strong that didn't match her age. The cowboy shifted in his saddle. He could have kept riding. It wasn't his business. Towns had their own ways of dealing with things. People had their own lives, their own problems. He had learned long ago not to get involved where he didn't belong, but his horse didn't move, or maybe it was him. Another laugh rang out, louder this time, and the girl's shoulders stiffened just a little more. That small movement, it was enough. Something deep inside the cowboy stirred, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something quieter, heavier. A recognition. Loneliness. He exhaled slowly, then guided his horse toward the fence. The children noticed him first. Their laughter faded as they turned, eyes widening slightly at the sight of the tall, weathered man in a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look threatening, but there was a quiet authority about him that made them step back without being told. The girl didn't look up. The cowboy dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward until he stood a few feet from her. For a moment, he said nothing. Up close, he could see the faint traces of dust on her cheeks, the careful way she held herself together. She was trying to be strong, too strong for someone so small. He lowered himself slowly to one knee. The movement caught her attention. Her eyes lifted, hesitant at first, then fully meeting his. They were searching, uncertain, but not broken. Not yet. The cowboy offered a small, gentle smile, not the kind meant to impress, but the kind meant to reassure. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, glancing briefly at the other children before answering. "Emily." "It's a good name," he said. "Strong." The other kids shifted awkwardly behind him, unsure of what was happening now. The cowboy tilted his head slightly, studying her for just a second longer. Then, in a voice calm and steady, he said words that seemed simple, but carried more weight than anyone there could fully understand. "You have one now, if you'll let me." The world seemed to pause. The wind slowed. The whispers stopped. Even the distant sounds of the town faded into the background. Emily blinked. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever stepped forward. The cowboy didn't move. He didn't rush her, didn't explain. He simply stayed there, kneeling in the dust, giving her the space to decide what those words meant. And in that quiet moment, something changed, not just for her, but for him too. The air in the schoolyard felt different now, quieter, heavier, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Emily didn't speak. She just stared at the cowboy, her small face filled with uncertainty. His words echoed in her mind over and over again. "You have won now, if you'll let me." No one had ever offered her something like that before. Not even close. Her fingers tightened slightly at the edge of her dress. She wasn't used to kindness that came without conditions. In her short life, promises had either been broken or never made at all. Behind them, the other children shuffled uncomfortably. One of the boys kicked at the dirt, avoiding eye contact. Another whispered something, but it quickly faded. Whatever game they had been playing, it was over now. The cowboy remained still, one knee pressed into the dusty ground, his hat casting a soft shadow over his face. There was no pressure in his eyes, no expectation, just patience. I don't understand," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all right," he replied gently. "You don't have to." She looked down again, then back up, studying him more carefully this time. His face was lined from years under the sun, his hands rough, his clothes worn from long days of work. He didn't look like someone who made big promises lightly. But still, why her? "Why would you say that?" she asked, her voice trembling just a little. "You don't even know me." A faint smile touched the cowboy's lips, not out of amusement, but understanding. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you don't need to know everything about someone to see they shouldn't be standing alone." Emily swallowed hard. Those words reached somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she had kept guarded for a long time. The wind passed through the yard again, softer now, almost comforting. A loose strand of her hair brushed across her cheek, and this time she didn't move it away. "You don't have to decide anything right now," the cowboy continued. "I just meant what I said." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Emily asked, "What's your name?" The question was small, but it meant everything. The cowboy's expression softened even more. "Daniel," he said. She nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "Daniel," she repeated, testing the sound of it. It felt strange, new, but not in a bad way. From the edge of the yard, a woman's voice suddenly called out, sharp with concern. "Emily!" Both of them turned. A woman hurried toward them, her steps quick and tense. She looked worried, protective. Her eyes moved from Emily to the cowboy in an instant, her expression tightening with caution. "Emily, are you all right?" she asked, placing a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "I'm okay," Emily replied softly. The woman's gaze shifted back to Daniel, studying him carefully. "Is there a problem here?" Daniel stood slowly, removing his hat in a quiet sign of respect. "No, ma'am," he said calmly. "No problem at all." She didn't relax. "Not yet. I saw you talking to her," she said. "What was that about?" There was a pause, but Daniel didn't hesitate. "I just told her she didn't have to stand alone," he answered simply. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, unsure what to make of that. Emily looked up at her, then back at Daniel. There was something new in her expression now, not just uncertainty, but a small flicker of something else. "Hope," he said. She began, then hesitated. The woman crouched slightly to meet her at eye level. "What did he say, Emily?" Emily glanced at Daniel one more time, as if asking for silent permission. He gave a small nod. He said I have a father now, she whispered. The words hung in the air. The woman straightened slowly, her expression shifting from concern to surprise. Then something more complicated. She looked at Daniel again. This time searching for something deeper truth, maybe. That's not something you say lightly, she said firmly. I know, Daniel replied, and I didn't. Silence settled between them again. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was uncertain, but real. The woman exhaled quietly, her grip on Emily's shoulder softening just a little. We'll need to talk about this, she said. Daniel nodded. I figured we might. Emily didn't fully understand what would come next. Grown-up conversations, decisions, doubts, those things were still beyond her, but as she stood there, she realized something simple. For the first time in a long while, someone had chosen her, and as Daniel placed his hat back on his head, he realized something too. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was the beginning of something he couldn't walk away from. By the next morning, the story had already spread across the small town. In places like this, news didn't travel, it rippled. From the general store to the church steps, from front porches to dusty road corners, people talked. And now, they all seemed to be talking about the same thing: the cowboy and the girl. Daniel noticed it the moment he stepped into town. Conversation softened as he passed. Eyes followed him just a second too long. Some people nodded politely, while others simply watched in silence. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't warmth either. It was curiosity mixed with doubt. He wasn't surprised. A man riding into town and telling a child, "You have a father now," wasn't something folks ignored. Not here, not anywhere. Still, Daniel walked steadily, boots brushing against the wooden planks as he approached the small general store. He pushed the door open, and the familiar creak echoed louder than usual. Inside, a few heads turned immediately. "Morning," Daniel said calmly. A couple of voices replied, but the tone was careful, measured. At the counter, an older man leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the wood. His gaze was steady, thoughtful. "You're the one folks are talking about," he said. Daniel didn't flinch. "Seems that way." The man studied him for a moment longer. "You planning to stay a while?" Daniel glanced toward the window, where the open land stretched far beyond the town's edge. For a second, he considered giving his usual answer, the one he'd given all his life. No. But this time, it didn't feel right. "I might," he said. The man nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away. "Well, this town takes its time with strangers." "I figured as much." The conversation ended there, but the message was clear. "You'll have to prove yourself." Across town, Emily sat quietly on the steps outside her small home. The morning air was cool, and the world felt different. She hugged her knees lightly, lost in thought. Everything had changed in a single moment yesterday. Or at least, it felt like it had. But now the questions were starting. Her guardian, Mrs. Harper, had been unusually quiet since they returned. Home, not cold, not angry, just thoughtful, careful. Emily could tell she was trying to understand something that didn't have an easy answer. The door creaked open behind her. "Emily," Mrs. Harper called gently. "Come inside, dear." Emily stood and stepped in, her small boots tapping softly against the wooden floor. Mrs. Harper sat at the table, hands folded. She looked up, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Sit with me for a moment." Emily nodded and climbed into the chair across from her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Mrs. Harper sighed softly. "That man—" "Daniel," she began. "Do you know him at all?" Emily shook her head. "No." "And yet, he said something very big to you." Emily looked down at her hands. He didn't say it like it was big, she murmured. He said it like he meant it. Mrs. Harper's expression softened slightly at that. I'm sure he did, she said. But meaning something and being able to follow through, those are two different things. Emily didn't respond right away. She understood more than people often thought. Enough to know that promises didn't always last. But he didn't have to say anything, she whispered. He could have just walked away. That made Mrs. Harper pause. It was true. He could have. She leaned back slightly, considering that thought. Sometimes people act on impulse, she said carefully. A moment can make someone say things they haven't fully thought through. Emily's gaze lifted, steady now. Do you think he didn't mean it? Mrs. Harper hesitated. I think, she said slowly. We don't know him yet. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached the house. He didn't rush. Didn't knock right away. He simply stood at the edge of the small wooden fence, taking a quiet breath. This wasn't like facing a storm or riding into unknown land. This was harder, because this time it mattered. He stepped forward and knocked gently on the door. A moment passed before it opened. Mrs. Harper stood there, her posture straight, her expression composed but watchful. Mr. Daniel, she sighed. Ma'am, he replied, removing his hat. They studied each other for a brief second, two people trying to measure truth without words. I was wondering if we could talk, Daniel said. Her grip on the door shifted slightly, but she didn't step aside just yet. I was expecting you might come, she answered. Another pause. Then finally, she opened the door wider. All right, she said. Let's talk. Inside, Emily stood quietly in the corner watching. Her heart beat just a little faster. Outside, the town continued its quiet rhythm, people working, talking, wondering. But inside that small home, something important was beginning. Not a decision, not yet, but a conversation that would shape everything that came next. Because in a town full of doubts, words alone would never be enough. Daniel would have to prove that his promise wasn't just something he said in a moment. It was something he intended to live by. The days that followed didn't bring instant answers, but they brought something better. Mrs. Harper hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no either. Instead, she allowed something in between, a careful, watchful space where Daniel could prove who he really was, not through words, but through actions. And Daniel understood. He didn't try to rush anything. He simply showed up. On a quiet morning, just as the sun began to stretch across the fields, Daniel stood by the wooden fence outside Emily's home. His horse waited patiently beside him, reins loose, tail swaying gently in the breeze. Emily stepped outside a moment later, her eyes immediately finding him. She hesitated at first, holding on to the doorframe. Morning, Daniel said, his voice calm and warm. Morning, she replied softly. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Daniel nodded toward the open land beyond the house. Thought you might want to see something different today. Emily glanced back inside. Mrs. Harper stood near the window, watching closely. Their eyes met, and after a brief pause, Mrs. Harper gave a small, careful nod. That was enough. Emily stepped forward. The first ride was slow. Daniel didn't lift her onto the horse right away. Instead, he showed her how to approach it, how to let the horse see her, how to move gently, how not to be afraid. This here's Rusty, he said, patting the horse's neck. He's kinder than he looks. Emily reached out hesitantly, her small hand brushing against Rusty's coat. The horse stood still, calm and steady. A faint smile touched her face. It was small, but real. See? Daniel said. He already likes you. She looked up at him, just for a moment, then back at the horse. That was the beginning. As the days passed, These quiet moments became something they both started to rely on. Daniel taught her how to ride not with strict instructions, but with patience. He let her make mistakes, let her laugh when she wobbled, and steadied her when she needed it. Balance comes with time, he told her. Same as trust. Emily didn't always respond with words, but she listened. And slowly she began to talk. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of a wide tree, Emily traced small patterns in the dirt with a stick. Other kids at school? She began, then stopped. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just waited. They used to ask me about my father, she continued quietly. At first, I didn't know what to say. Then I just stopped answering. Her voice didn't break, but it carried a weight far beyond her years. Daniel leaned back slightly against the tree, his gaze steady on the horizon. That's a heavy thing for someone your size to carry, he said. Emily shrugged a little. You get used to it, he shook his head gently. Doesn't mean you should have to. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at him, really looked this time. Not just at the cowboy who had stepped into her life, but at the man behind the words. You don't talk much about yourself, she said. Daniel let out a quiet breath. That's because there's not much worth telling, he replied. Emily tilted her head slightly. I think there is. That caught him off guard. He gave a faint smile, but there was something thoughtful behind it now. Maybe someday, he said. Later that evening, as Emily returned home, Mrs. Harper noticed the difference immediately. There was a lightness in her step, a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. You had a good day? She asked. Emily nodded. We rode by the river. Mrs. Harper raised an eyebrow slightly. We? Me and Daniel. The name came easier now, more natural. Mrs. Harper studied her for a moment, then softened. He seems to have a way with you, she said. Emily looked down, then back up again. He listens. That simple answer stayed with Mrs. Harper long after Emily had gone to bed. Out in the fading light, Daniel sat alone near the edge of the field. The sky burned with shades of orange and gold, slowly giving way to dusk. His hat rested beside him, and his gaze was distant. He hadn't planned for any of this. Not the girl, not the promise, not the feeling that had begun to take root in his chest. Quiet, steady, undeniable. For years he had kept his distance from people. It was easier that way, safer. But now he found himself thinking about tomorrow, about what Emily might say, about whether she'd smile again. And that scared him more than he expected, because it meant something. Back at the house, Emily stood by her window, looking out at the open land. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel so empty. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't standing alone anymore, and neither was he. The town had started to soften, but not completely. People no longer whispered quite as loudly when Daniel passed by. A few even greeted him with a nod or a quiet morning. But there was still distance, still questions that hadn't been answered, and Daniel knew why. Because there was a part of him he hadn't shared, a part he wasn't sure he knew how to explain. It was a cool evening when it finally began to surface. Emily and Daniel sat near the edge of the field, watching the sky fade into soft shades of purple and blue. Rusty grazed nearby, the slow rhythm of his movements filling the silence between them. Emily had grown more comfortable now. She spoke more freely, asked more questions. Some were simple, about horses, about the land, about the places Daniel had been. But that evening, her question was different. Did you ever have a family? She asked. It wasn't asked carelessly. There was curiosity in her voice, but also something deeper, something searching. Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon where the last line of sunlight was disappearing. His jaw tightened just slightly, and his hands rested still against his knees. "Yes," he said finally. Emily turned toward him, waiting. "What happened?" she asked gently. Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried years behind it. "I let them go," he said. Emily frowned, confused. "Why?" That question lingered in the air. Because the answer wasn't simple. "I thought I was doing the right thing at the time," Daniel began. "I was younger, restless, always moving. I believed that staying in one place meant giving something up." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There was someone," he continued. "She wanted a different kind of life. A steady one, a home. I told myself I wasn't built for that." Emily listened closely, her expression quiet and serious. "So you left?" she asked. Daniel nodded once. "I told myself she'd be better off without me, that I'd only disappoint her if I stayed." Emily's grip tightened slightly around the stick she held. "Were you right?" she asked. Daniel's eyes lowered for a moment. "No," he said. The word was soft, but it carried weight. The wind moved gently through the field, rustling the grass around them. "I spent years convincing myself I made the right choice," Daniel continued. "Kept moving from place to place. Never stayed long enough to think about it too much." Emily didn't interrupt. "But the truth is," he added, his voice quieter now, "some mistakes don't follow you loudly. They just sit with you, day after day." Emily looked down at the ground, tracing another small line in the dirt. "Do you think about them a lot?" she asked. Daniel gave a faint, almost distant smile. "More than I'd like to admit." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had become something they both understood, a space where thoughts could settle. Then Emily asked something that caught him off guard. "Is that why you said what you said to me?" Daniel turned to her. "What do you mean?" "At the school," she said. "When you said I have a father now." Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his face carefully. "Was it because of them?" Daniel didn't look away this time. "Partly," he admitted, "but not in the way you think." Emily waited. "I didn't say it to fix the past," he explained. "I said it because no one should feel like they don't belong to someone." Emily's expression softened slightly. "And you meant it?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I don't make promises like that unless I do." Back at the house later that night, Mrs. Harper noticed something different again. Emily was quieter than usual, but not withdrawn, thoughtful. After dinner, she lingered at the table while Mrs. Harper cleaned up. "He had a family before," Emily said suddenly. Mrs. Harper paused, glancing over her shoulder. "He told you that?" Emily nodded. "He left them," she added. Mrs. Harper turned fully now, her expression sharpening. "Just slightly." "That's not something to take lightly," she said. "I know," Emily replied. There was no anger in her voice, no judgment, just understanding. "And what do you think about that?" Mrs. Harper asked carefully. Emily thought for a moment. "I think," she said slowly, "he knows it was a mistake." Mrs. Harper studied her, surprised by the certainty in her tone. "And that matters?" she asked. Emily looked up. "Yes," she said, "because it means he won't do it." Again, out in the distance, Daniel stood alone beneath the night sky. The stars stretched endlessly above him, quiet and unmoving. He hadn't spoken about his past in a long time, not because he had forgotten it, but because he had never found a reason to face it until now. Because this time it wasn't just about him. It was about a little girl who had started to trust him, and trust was something he couldn't afford to lose. Not again. For the first time in years, Daniel understood something clearly. This wasn't just a second chance. It was his chance to become the man he should have been all along. Trust didn't break loudly. It didn't shatter like glass or announce itself with anger. Sometimes it slipped quietly in small moments that felt almost unnoticeable until they weren't. It started with something simple, a promise. Daniel had told Emily he would come by early that morning. They were supposed to ride out past the hills, somewhere new. Somewhere she hadn't seen yet. Emily had been excited. 4. The first time, she woke before the sun had fully risen. She got dressed quickly, her small hands fumbling slightly in her eagerness. She even brushed her hair twice, something Mrs. Harper noticed with a quiet smile. "You're up early," Mrs. Harper said. "He said we'd go riding," Emily replied, trying to sound calm, but failing just a little. Mrs. Harper nodded. "Then I suppose you shouldn't keep him waiting." Emily stepped outside, her eyes scanning the empty road. The morning air was crisp. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath. She waited and waited. Back near the edge of town, Daniel tightened the strap on a wooden fence post, his movement steady but distracted. He hadn't meant to be late. A loose section of fencing had collapsed earlier that morning, and by the time he noticed it, a few cattle had wandered too far out. It had taken longer than expected to guide them back, to fix what needed fixing. He glanced at the rising sun, his expression shifting instantly. Too much time had passed. "Emily," he muttered under his breath. Without wasting another second, he grabbed his hat and moved quickly toward his horse. By the time Daniel reached the house, the sun had climbed higher. Too high. Emily still stood outside, but something had changed. She wasn't pacing anymore. She wasn't looking down the road with hope. She was just standing there, quiet, still. Daniel slowed as he approached, his chest tightening slightly. "Emily," he called gently. She didn't respond right. Away. When she finally looked up, her expression wasn't angry. That would have been easier. It was something else. Disappointment. "You're late," she said. The words were simple, calm, but they landed heavier than anything else could have. "I know," Daniel replied, stepping closer. "I'm sorry. I had to." "You said?" "Morning," she interrupted softly. He stopped. "Because she was right." "I did," he admitted. Mrs. Harper stood just inside the doorway watching. She didn't step in. This wasn't her moment to control. It was theirs. "I waited," Emily continued, her voice steady but quieter now. "I thought maybe you got lost or forgot where I live." "I didn't forget," Daniel said quickly. "Not for a second." Emily looked down. "That's what people say," she murmured. The words hit deeper than she intended, but they were honest. And honesty, even when it hurt, mattered. Daniel removed his hat slowly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to find the right words. "There was a problem with the fence," he explained. "Some cattle got loose. I had to fix it before they wandered too far." Emily didn't look convinced. "Or maybe it wasn't about the reason at all. You could have told me," she sighed. Daniel paused. "I thought I'd make it back in time," he admitted. "But you didn't." "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." The space between them felt wider now, not because of distance, but because of something fragile that had shifted. Emily took a small step back. It wasn't dramatic, but Daniel noticed. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice more grounded this time. "Not just for being late, but for making you feel like you didn't matter." Emily's eyes flickered slightly at that, because that was the part that hurt, not the waiting. The feeling behind it. "You said you wouldn't leave," she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. "I didn't leave," he said gently, "but you didn't come either." That left no room for excuses. And Daniel knew it. For a moment, he considered trying to fix it with more words. But something stopped him. Because this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. This was something he had to show. You're right, he said finally. Emily looked up, surprised. I made you a promise, he continued, and today I didn't keep it the way I should have. The honesty caught her off guard. I can't undo this morning, he added, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. Emily didn't respond right away. She was thinking, measuring, deciding. Mrs. Harper watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softened just slightly. After a long pause, Emily spoke. Are you going to forget again? The question was small, but it carried everything. Daniel shook his head. No, he said, because now I know what it feels like to be on the other side of that. Emily studied him for a moment longer. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, not all the way. But enough. I don't like waiting, she said quietly. The days after the missed promise were quieter, but not distant. Something had shifted between them, not broken. Just more real. Daniel didn't make the same mistake twice. Every morning after that, he showed up early. Sometimes even before Emily stepped outside. He never announced it, never pointed it out. He just stood there, waiting, steady, reliable, present. And Emily noticed. She didn't mention it either, but each time she saw him already there, something inside her settled a little more. One evening, as the sky turned soft with fading light, Emily sat on the fence while Daniel adjusted the saddle on Rusty. You've been early every day, she said casually, swinging her feet slightly. Daniel didn't look up right away. Figured it was a good habit to have. Emily studied him for a moment. You're trying really hard, she said. Daniel paused, then gave a small, honest nod. Yeah, I am. There was no pride in his voice. No need to impress. Just truth. Emily hopped down from the fence and walked a few steps closer. Why? She asked. The question wasn't sharp. It was sincere. Daniel rested his hands on the saddle, thinking for a moment before answering. Because I meant what I said, he replied. Emily tilted her head slightly. Even after everything? Daniel met her gaze. Especially after everything. They walked together out toward the open field, the grass brushing softly against their boots. The world felt calm, steady, like it had found a rhythm, for a while. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Then, without looking at him, Emily spoke again. I was scared that day, she admitted. Daniel's expression softened. I know. I thought. She hesitated, then continued, I thought maybe you were like everyone else. Daniel didn't interrupt. I thought you said something nice. And then you just stopped coming. Her voice was quiet, but clear. Daniel took a slow breath. I understand why you'd think that, he said. Emily glanced at him. Do you? He nodded. Because I've been that person before, he admitted. The one who leaves. Emily stopped walking. It made him stop too. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other. But I'm not going to be that person with you, Daniel continued. Not this time. Emily searched his face carefully. How do you know? She asked. It wasn't doubt. It was caution. The kind built from experience. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched down slightly so they were at eye level, just like the first day. I don't know everything, he said honestly. But I do know this. He paused, making sure she was really listening. I choose to stay. The words were simple, but this time, they weren't just a promise. They were a decision. Emily's eyes flickered with something deeper now. Even if it's hard? She asked. Daniel gave a small, almost knowing smile. It will be hard, he said. That's how you know it matters. The wind moved gently around them, carrying a quiet stillness across the field. Emily looked down for a moment, then back up again. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Daniel's expression softened even more. Neither do I, he said. That made her blink in surprise. You don't? He shook his head. No, but I think we can figure it out. That answer stayed with her, because it wasn't perfect. It wasn't certain, but it was real. After a long pause, Emily took a small step forward. Then another. Until she was standing close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice. Okay, she said quietly. Daniel didn't move. Didn't rush. He just waited. I want to try, she added. The words were small, but they meant everything. Daniel nodded slowly, a quiet sense of relief settling in his chest. Me too, he said, back at the house. Mrs. Harper watched from the window as the two of them walked side by side. There was something different now, not just in Emily, but in Daniel too. He didn't look like a man passing through anymore. He looked like someone who had found a reason to stay. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Emily reached out just slightly and took hold of Daniel's hand. It wasn't tight. Not dependent. Just certain. Daniel glanced down, surprised for only a second before his expression softened. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because in that quiet moment, something had finally become clear. Wasn't about replacing the past. It wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It was about a choice, a shared one. They weren't perfect, didn't have all the answers, but they had something stronger than that. They had chosen each other. And sometimes that's where a real family begins. Time has a quiet way of changing things, not all at once, not in ways that demand attention, but slowly, gently, until one day you look around and realize nothing feels the same anymore. The town had noticed. The same people who once watched Daniel with quiet suspicion now greeted him by name. Conversations no longer stopped when he walked by. Instead, they welcomed him in small smiles, simple nods, the kind that meant you belong here now. And Emily was no longer the quiet girl standing alone at the edge of the schoolyard. She laughed more, spoke more, and when the other children gathered, she didn't stand apart anymore. She stood among them, not because anything about her past had changed, but because she had, one afternoon, under the wide shade of an old tree near the school, a group of children sat together sharing stories. Emily was in the middle of them, her eyes bright as she spoke. And then Rusty just stopped moving, she said, trying not to laugh. And I thought I did something wrong, but Daniel said he just wanted a break. The children laughed, not at her, but with her. A small moment, but a powerful one. Across the road, Daniel stood quietly, watching. He didn't interrupt. He didn't call out. He just observed, a faint smile settling on his face, because this was what mattered. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft gold and amber, Daniel and Emily walked side by side toward home. You were telling stories today, Daniel said. Emily looked up at him, a hint of pride in her expression. I was. You're getting good at that. She smiled slightly. I had a good teacher. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh, and who's that? Emily shrugged playfully. Someone who talks less than he should. That made him chuckle, a rare, genuine sound. When they reached the house, Mrs. Harper stood by the door, watching them approach. There was something peaceful in her expression now, something settled. You're late, she said lightly. Emily gasped softly, then looked at Daniel. He raised his hands in mock defense. Now hold on, I'm exactly on time. Mrs. Harper smiled. It was the kind of moment that would have felt impossible not long ago. Simple, warm, complete. That night, after dinner, the three of them sat together on the porch. The air was calm, the sky scattered with stars. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Then Mrs. Harper broke the silence. I've been thinking, she said. Daniel straightened slightly, sensing the weight behind her words. So have I, he replied. She glanced at Emily, who sat quietly between them, then back at Daniel. This arrangement. She began carefully. It's no longer just temporary, is it? Daniel didn't hesitate this time. No, he said. Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. I didn't think it would be, she admitted. Emily looked between them, her heart beating just a little faster. This felt important, bigger than their usual conversations. I needed to be sure. Mrs. Harper continued. Not just about you, but about what this means for her. Daniel's gaze softened. I understand. And now? She asked. Daniel glanced at Emily, then back at Mrs. Harper. Now I know, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Silence followed, but it wasn't uncertain anymore. It was full. Mrs. Harper exhaled quietly, as if letting go of something she had been holding on to for a long time. Then I think, she said, her voice gentler now, it's time we stop calling this an arrangement. Emily's breath caught slightly. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just listened. Daniel nodded. Slowly. I'd like that, he said. Mrs. Harper placed a hand gently over Emily's. You deserve something real, she said. Softly. Emily looked up, her eyes shining not with tears, but with something stronger. Belonging. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. I may not know how to be perfect, he said, but I know how to stay. Emily smiled at that. Because now she believed him. The stars above seemed brighter that